Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Cadet First Class Angelina Abden. It is my privilege to welcome you to the 32nd Annual National Character and Leadership Symposium, and specifically the Enix Heritage Keynote Lecture, featuring a cadet-moderated panel with our Air Force and Space Force senior leaders. Please join me in recognizing our generous sponsors, Lieutenant Colonel Retired Earl A. Enix, Class of 1977, and Mrs. Candy Enix. Ladies and gentlemen, I will now read our senior leader bios. Once all of the introductions are read, we will welcome them to the stage. Please hold your applause until then. General David W. Alvin is the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. As Chief, he serves as the senior uniformed Air Force officer responsible for the organization, training, and equipping of 689,000 active duty Guard, Reserve, and civilian forces serving in the United States and overseas. As a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the General and other service functions as the military advisors to the Secretary of Defense, National Security Council, and the President. General Alvin graduated from the United States Air Force Academy in 1986. He has commanded at the squadron and wing levels, including the 97th Air Mobility Wing, Altus Air Force Base, Oklahoma. He has held major command staff assignments and served on the Joint Staff. General Stephen A. Whiting is the Commander, United States Space Command. As Commander of the 11th Unified Combatant Command, he is responsible for defending United States and Allied interests in the space domain, providing space effects to joint warfighters around the world, and protecting the joint force from space-enabled attacks. Within that responsibility, he leads over 18,000 soldiers, Marines, sailors, Coast Guardsmen, airmen, and guardians operating around the space-based systems around the globe. General Whiting is a 1989 distinguished graduate of the United States Air Force Academy with a degree in aeronautical engineering. He is a space operations officer and has commanded the 13th Space Warning Squadron, the 614th and Space Operations Center and Joint Space Operations Center, the 21st Space Wing, and the Combined Space Force Component Command and 14th Air Force, and Space Operations Command. Chief Master Sergeant of the Space Force, John F. Bentavenia, serves at the highest enlisted level of leadership and provides direction for the enlisted force, representing their interests to the American public and to those in all levels of government. He acts as a personal advisor to the Chief of Space Operations and the Secretary of the Air Force on all issues regarding the welfare, readiness, morale, proper utilization, and development of the United States Space Force. Chief Bentavenia is the second Chief Master Sergeant appointed to the highest non-commissioned officer position in the Space Force. Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, David A. Flossie, represents the highest enlisted level of leadership and as such provides direction for the enlisted force and represents their interest as appropriate to the American public and to all those and levels of government. He serves as the senior enlisted leader and primary advisor to the Chief of Staff and Secretary of the Air Force on all matters regarding the readiness, training, professional development, and effective utilization of more than 665,000 total force airmen. Chief Flossie is the 20th Chief Master Sergeant appointed to the highest non-commissioned officer position in the United States Space Force, Air Force. Finally, I am also honored to introduce today's moderator for the panel, Cadet First Class Madeline Strang. Please stand for the arrival of the official party.
All right.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. And now, please join me in a round of applause to welcome our senior leader panel. Cadet Strang and senior leaders, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, ma'am. First, gentlemen, I want to say thank you for being here with us today. We appreciate your time and your willingness to speak with us. I'm going to open the floor with my first question to General Alvin. Sir, we're wondering, with new senior leaders currently in place, what major changes in military policy or defense strategy do you anticipate in the Air Force?
Start me off with an easy one, right? Great. Well, first of all, thanks to the whole team here for having us. This is one of the highlights of the year when we get the chance to share some ideas, share some thoughts with the next generation of Air Force and Space Force leadership, and really just share some thoughts. So along those lines, I think that's a complicated question, but I think you will see the policies of this administration play out in the things like they've been paying attention to with respect to securing the borders and respect to looking at the People's Republic of China. But those policies will evolve going forward, and then the Department of Defense will adapt to those, and the Department of Air Force will adapt to those, and the Air Force and Space Force will adapt to those. So we really just fall in line with the senior policies, national security policies of our nation. But here's one thing I would like us to focus on. In the meantime, if you haven't seen it, Secretary Hegseth has been crystal clear about the priorities for the Department of Defense. Reviving the warrior ethos, rebuilding the military, and reestablishing deterrence. Now, I know I've sat in seats much like yours, and that's one more thing I got to memorize, the next 3 priorities, and be able to list them, et cetera, et cetera. I want you to think about the first one. The other 2, rebuilding the military, there's secondary and a lot of things that go with that. Reestablishing deterrence, it becomes complex, but there's some very clear things that we will do to support that. But I want to talk about the first one. Let's talk about reviving the warrior ethos, because I want us to internalize and think what that means. First of all, what is an ethos? An ethos is a set of values and principles and beliefs that bind individuals together in a community or a culture. So what would the warrior ethos be? It would be those values, those principles that come together, individuals come together as part of a unified team in this profession of arms. And the values and the principles that are at the height of this warrior culture, this warrior ethos, are courage and commitment and sacrifice, integrity and trust. And those are the things that we must value. Those are the things that we must develop. It means I have to know what the mission is. And I have to know that I am critical to the mission, but I am not the mission. I have to know that my value to the team is not my individuality. My value is what I bring to the success of the team. I have to know that in this warrior ethos, as we develop it and build it and strengthen it, is that it becomes second nature, that I know my wingman, my battle buddy, whoever it is on the team can depend on me and I can depend on them. So when we get in the darkest days of doing the toughest things, the most dangerous things, I am ready, and I know my team is ready to do things for people we've never met. That is what it means to be in this profession of arms. And the warrior ethos is something we build. It's not something you can go and pick up at the grocery store. I'm going to get me a case of warrior ethos. It has to start with you, and it has to be in the decisions you make, in the actions that you take, thinking about those in terms of the team, in terms of the mission. And our Air Force core values fall right into that. Integrity first. I say something, you can trust me. You can know I'm going to do what you told me to do. Service before self. It's about that sacrifice for others, for the mission. Excellence in all we do. We don't go anything halfway. So I think as we're looking at how we get to what the actual policies will be or the different elements of strategy would be, those 3 priorities of our Defense Secretary are crystal clear. And the first one, reviving the warrior ethos, that starts here. That starts here at this institution, and that starts at the institutions that are represented by the people here who are going to join our ranks. You start it when you come in, you build it, and you strengthen it. It frankly could be the difference between victory and defeat. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. On a similar note, I'll turn to Chief Pennsylvania. Earlier, you were speaking about mission readiness and ensuring that everybody underneath your chain of command is all set to go when it's time to act. So on that note, I'm wondering, how do you ensure that your service members on all levels remain resilient and mission-focused, and perhaps with that warrior ethos in mind, especially during change?
Yeah, and thanks for the question. And thanks for letting me come back to our United States Air Force Academy. I had a chance to be here last year, and I was so excited to get invited back again this year. So I guess I did a good job last year, so I will come back. But thanks for the question. You know, the Space Force, so proud to say we turned 5 years old in December, so 5 years. And over those 5 years, we have accomplished so much, but it has been consistent change. Consistent change. And we have so much opportunity that still lays before us. So change has been a constant. And I would say that, when you talk about how do you manage that, how do you keep people focused, first of all, you have to have trust in leadership. Leadership has to build trust so that throughout the organization, throughout the echelons of command, whatever your responsibilities are at your echelon, you can focus on those because you know that the men and women who are on the echelon above you, your leadership, is taking care of you, is doing the right things, making the right decisions, looking at the right data. So when you go through change, you got to make sure you have trust within the foundation and within the organization. But it also means that trust has to be at every single echelon. Not just about, we just got to trust General Saltzman and myself. No, if you're a flight commander, if you're a squadron commander, if you're a Delta commander, you have to make sure that you build and instill that trust within your organization. And you have to be able to communicate, what's the reason for the change? In language, that echelon, they understand why. How does it affect them personally? What is their role in the change? The change isn't, well, someone else is, I'm not responsible to implement that change. I'm not responsible for understanding why that change is there. It's so vital that when we communicate this, that we have that trust, and across through echelon, we understand why we're doing what we're doing, the direction that we're moving forward towards, and what success looks like in that change. Because every single member, regardless of their rank, regardless whether they're wearing a suit or whether they're wearing a uniform, has a role to play in that change. And that's a constant active message and leadership process that I think we are working to implement within the service, and I think that helps manage resiliency, keeps men and women focused on the mission, and keeps them understanding that their leadership will take care of them and do what they need to do to take care of the member, but also make sure that the mission gets done, which is why we're all here, why we're members of the profession of arms, is to get the mission done.
Thank you, sir. General Whiting, do you have any input on that? Especially how you build trust in such a young organization.
Yeah, thank you. And I really appreciate the Air Force Academy having me out. It's such a privilege to be here with these incredible leaders from the Air Force and the Space Force. And to all of you in uniform, thank you for raising your hand and joining our military at a time of consequence. In many ways, we're back to the 1980s when General Alvin and I came to the Air Force Academy when we were facing a great power, a near-peer competitor, and that was the focus. And we've kind of come back to that now 40 years later, and you're serving in a very consequential time. Building on some of the comments that General Alvin made, at an institution like this, or whatever commissioning program, whatever military entry program you're going through, building the trust that comes from being part of a mission-driven organization, and that's what we are. Ultimately, the mission is the most important thing that we're all going to have to execute, and when we're all clearly focused on that mission, and we see that each other is focused on that mission, that starts to build that trust that we're all in this together. Another aspect of that is that we are a values-laden organization, and General Alvin just went through the Air Force core values, and the Chief and I can go through the Space Force core values. They're complementary, even though they're different. But it means that that wingman, that battle buddy, that constellation member that's on each side of you, he or she is approaching the problem, executing the mission with the same values at heart. And that's critical. And then the third thing I would identify is that we're purpose-driven as well. We serve because we love this country, and this country is worth defending, and it's worth that the United States and our allies in the West and across the world who value freedom, that these values are upheld, and that's a purpose that's worthy of all of us serving together. And I think those three features that really get inculcated at a place like the Air Force Academy or in these other programs, that's what really builds that trust so we can execute our mission together.
Thank you, sir. I'll now turn to, so we've spoken a lot about building trust and relationships in the force. Chief Flossie, I'd now like to ask you, how do our alliances and partnerships on the global scale counter our global competitors advancing military capabilities, and then how are those relationships evolving?
That's a great question, thanks. You're hearing a theme here, and it's kind of a basic understanding of what our main thing is, right? And we have allies and partners around the world, and that is an asymmetric advantage of our nation. because we share values across the world with many, many great friends and partners. So when we talk about today's near-peer threat environment, that's when we're talking about nations competing, and we're talking about a very capable and very dangerous foe in the Indo-Pacific theater, the reality is we can't go about that alone. We can't unilaterally combat the massive influence that the PRC has around the world. We, though, have the amazing advantage of allies, partners, and friends around the world that our adversaries do not have. It is a luxury and a privilege that we are very closely aligned with like-minded and similarly thinking nations around the Indo-Pacific theater and globally. So how is that evolving? We are very much invested at the department level, both services, in building those partnerships and establishing those relationships now. Things like access basing and overflight, you don't accomplish those things in times of crisis. You have to build relationships over time. And whether it's through exchange programs at academies like this around our Air Force and around the other air forces of our friends and partners that we send airmen to, we've built those relationships. We establish relationships at our echelon of command, but we are infusing that throughout the force as well. So whether it's exchange programs, exercises, spending time together in each other's organizations, and learning how we fight. So we've been integrated for a very long time with our allies and partners, but we need to progress that towards the ability to interoperate, and we're doing that. We've seen exercises throughout the Indo-Pacific. As recently as just last week, we're wrapping up exercise Cope North, where we for 2.5 weeks straight, we're launching 30-plus fifth-gen fighters out of a U.S. base where I like to say America starts its day, right? Andersen Air Force Base in Guam, with the Japanese and the Australians there together, as well as the Joint Force flying all variants of the F-35, launching those sorties twice a day at nearly 100% mission capable rate, because we started to partner. We started to work with each other on shared resources, capabilities, and exploiting that so that we can put combat air power in the air anytime, anywhere, and doing that together with our partners. It is an advantage that no other threat to our way of life has. So we'll continue to build that out. We even we had the opportunity to fly the Australian Aviator of the Year out here with us. Many of you have got a chance to interact with Corporal Ali and meet her. She'll be leading to a commission as well. So we're building those relationships at every echelon of command, because we know we're going to fight together. So we've got to train, exercise, and qualify together as well.
Thank you, sir.
Absolutely.
General Alvin, as we've created these relationships on a global scale, but then also in the Joint Force itself, have you had any lessons learned along the way that you think, boy, if I was sitting here right now, I wish I knew before getting to your current position?
Well, there's a lot. That's a long list. I tell you, I will take that question in the direction of, I like where you're talking with the Joint Force. I want to talk about that a little bit, about how our services have evolved. And we talk about the Joint Force like it's a thing, and we almost should, but the Joint Force is made up of services. And those services have their own service cultures. And those service cultures we're proud of them. They are part of who we are as a service. And they are part of that service ethos. There's a culture within that. And I think early on in our Air Force life, it was we had enough of a difference of a culture and a mission that we sort of broke away from the Army slowly, Army Air Corps, Army Air Forces, Air Force. And I think it made sense, because we need to develop our own culture and understand how to do the warfighting business within our own service, and then how to make sure we deconflicted and complemented the other services. I think we've come to a point now, and it's hard to really quantify, but we need to be careful that as we advance our own service cultures, we don't do it at the expense of more effective warfighting for all the joint forces together. And I think technology is a tension with that, because there are things that we can do technologically in the areas of command and control, in the areas of joint force command decision making, that we still relegate to the services, because we have. an air component commander, land component commander, maritime component commander, space component commander. In some cases that makes sense, but when we are in a world where the pace of change is unprecedented and technology offers opportunities for us to do what I believe, and maybe this is me speaking as an airman, and I know my guardians probably have a similar mindset, is one of the parts of the changing character of war is this primacy on speed, agility and tempo, speed of recognition, speed of decision, speed of action. Technology has really offered that to us in a way we haven't seen in my lifetime, to be sure. So we have the ability to maybe know things and maybe make different decisions. And so as we want to be more effective as a joint fighting force in the future, I think we need to be more creative, and we need to be able to give a little bit to understand how much our service culture, which is very important, it really advances us and makes us a better joint force. And are there areas where we need to understand that being joint from the beginning is going to allow us to leverage the technology that is really going along with the changing character of war. But it's a work in progress.
Thank you, sir. I'll turn to General Whiting now. On a similar note, how is the Space Force integrating this idea of joint force and technology to combat, China's current expansion of space capabilities? Are current priorities shifting or strengthening in any way?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Chief Pennsylvania mentioned the Space Force is just over 5 years old, created in December of 2019. U.S. Space Command was stood up just a few months before that in August of 2019. And these two organizations were created because of the kind of advancements that you just mentioned. We were created for this world, for great power competition against China and Russia. So these evolutions that we continue to see, and I say that we see China moving breathtakingly fast. In fact, I'm about to upgrade my verb there to say that they're moving jaw-droppingly fast in space. It is incredible how quick they're moving, both on the military side and the civil side. So that has not changed our priorities. Now, at U.S. Space Command, I like to talk about our mission in terms of three moral priorities, or moral imperatives that we owe the joint force and the nation, to get to your question about jointness. Number one is, it's our moral imperative to continue to support the joint force with the space capabilities that they've become reliant on. The services don't have the force structure to fight the way they used to fight before. Space now has enabled them to be more precise, more lethal, and more far-ranging. Our second moral imperative is to protect the space capabilities we have today from these threats that we see. They are not future possibilities. They are real in the domain today, and they run the gamut from cyber to non-kinetic jamming to lasing to direct descent ASATs to on-orbit ASATs. And we've got to protect ourselves against that. And then our third moral imperative is to make sure we can help protect the joint force from space-enabled attack. China in particular has built a space-based intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and tracking enterprise to hold at risk our naval forces, air forces that are doing agile combat employment inside the first and second island chain, Army, Marine Corps forces, and we've got to, with the Space Force and Space Command, help protect them from those attacks. So we think space is all about jointness. And certainly the U.S. Space Force brings us the vast majority of our capability at U.S. Space Command, but I also have an Air Force component. 1st Air Force down at Tyndall Air Force Base with a great graduate of this institution, Lieutenant General Luke Amon, who's the commander down there. I have an Army component, a Navy component, a Marine Corps component. We cannot get our mission done without all of the joint force participating in that, because it's just too big a mission for one service or one command. But together we can get after this mission and make sure the joint force has what it needs. Thank
you, sir. I'll continue asking you this question, but Chief Pennsylvania, if you'd like to jump in, feel free. I'm wondering, with that in mind, what advice do you have for the next generation of military leaders as they navigate the changes and evolving landscape that you're mentioning?
Yeah, first, we need your great ideas. We need your energy, your new perspective that you're bringing to bear on this challenge. General Saltzman, our Chief of Space Operations, has put out a theory of competitive endurance that kind of starts to lay out what are the things we need to be successful in this environment. And he talks about 3 key facets there. And Chief, I'll ask you to help if I, keeping all the lists sometimes gets to be a challenge. But he says we've got to avoid operational surprise. That's right. got to deny first mover advantage, and then we've got to do responsible counter space campaigning. Yes. We think that's a really important intellectual contribution, and at U.S. Space Command, we're now thinking, how do we extend that into the warfight itself? How do we bring together the command and control for a joint interagency combined commercial set of capabilities so we can be most successful? And then ultimately, we need your good ideas on how do we achieve space superiority, because we're going to have to be able to operate when and where we need in space while denying that to our potential adversaries. And of course, that's not a dissimilar definition, I don't think, from my 35 years in the Air Force to how the Air Force thinks about air superiority. But we're going to need that. That's foundational to joint force success. But I'll turn it over to Chief B9 for some better thinking there.
Yeah, no, sir, I agree. And General Alvin even kind of mentioned it, right? The nature of warfare has changed. The speed and breadth of near-peer competitor threats that we're up against, there are more geographic boundaries anymore. And we talk about the effectiveness of the joint force. You have to think outside the box as a warfighter. Your critical thinking, that warrior ethos that we talked about, also goes into how you look at problem sets and understanding that there is no necessarily small theater of war anymore. This is a global enterprise, and we have to be concerned about that. So, as you're thinking about what's going on across the globe and the threats that we face, don't look at a map and just think about, hey, this is only within this geographic region, and at this embarkation line, it ends. This is completely just a seafaring or sea domain concern, or this is an air superiority concern, or this is a landmass issue we have to worry about. As warfighters, as members of the profession of arms, the nature of war has forced us. We have to think jointly. We have to think without barriers. We need to think outside the box. We need to think at speed. And it's a challenge. But when I get a chance to engage with the next generation of leaders, as General Whiting said, who are going to help solve these problems and look at it from an innovative perspective, I am confident that we're going to get there. I am confident that you're going to face those challenges head on, understand what exactly it means to accomplish the mission in the future fight. But please remember, we've got to get away from, there are the service cultures, service identities, the core functions of the services, but all the end state is what makes a joint fight, the joint force, more lethal and more effective. That is the warfighting mindset that we need of you in the future fight.
Thank you, gentlemen. With that, Chief Flossie, we've talked broadly about how to make sure your team is warfighting oriented. And the theme of this whole conference is warfighters to win. What advice would you give cadets to just wake up every day and empower themselves to have that warfighting mentality?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Again, I'll kind of play on some of the comments you've already heard. And B9 just mentioned the changing character of war. It is a complex global strategic environment. That can be a lot to start to think about. And I think what happens occasionally with our leadership across the services is we zoom in on that 5-meter target and we start to focus too much on the tactics and the functions and the capabilities that we have. And we are really working hard. And what I think helps us work through a lot of these difficult problems is slowing down for just a minute and identifying what the main thing is. What is the mission that we're trying to accomplish? What is the effect we're trying to reach? And if you start with the end in mind and you focus on the mission outcomes over the functions, and you can very quickly come to solutions that are elusive when you're stuck in your either functional or area of expertise stovepipes. We have worked really hard, and we are putting principles in place here at the Academy and on the enlisted side through 2nd Air Force with the general that's here with us today, through basic military training, so that all of our service members are being reoriented to focus on the mission outcome over the functions and being a mission-ready airman. So as a young leader, I think if you wake up at any particular given day, and we might have handed you a very technical job, we absolutely are. We take a lot of pride in our technical expertise. I spent 20 years as a nuclear weapons specialist in the United States Air Force, and we very much established our value, and our ethos was based on your operational and technical competence. But it was in order to do something else. A properly working fission bomb is of little use if you don't understand the mission that you're trying to achieve, whether that's strategic deterrence, whether that's holding targets at risk so that our enemies wake up when we're doing other things in a conventional way on a daily basis, that they say, you know what, not today, right? So if you understand the outcome, the O plans that you're supporting and what your airmen or guardians or service members in a joint organization, if you understand the mission that you're being assigned and what you're trying to accomplish, and your focused efforts are on accomplishing that mission, you look at what resources you have to bring to bear and you optimize for that outcome. That is how we're going to get through this. And we're going to continue to fight and win. We will kick ass anytime we need to because we have the capabilities, we have the warfighters, we're an all-volunteer force. Our human capital that we're investing in right here in this room is the advantage that we have that no other nation knows how to produce. We uniquely build critical thinkers that are operationally competent, that understand the mission, that know how to take risk and apply the tools of the trade in order to achieve the mission. So we have to continue to pour into our leaders, trust in their capabilities, provide them what they need, and give them the room to go execute.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, ma'am?
I'll continue with that note.
Sure.
We have many firsties in the room today who are about to graduate and lead people in our Air and Space Force. How do you suggest that they help build this human capital that is so essential to our operations and success?
Sure. So again, there's no greater investment than in the person to your left and right. And while you can read the National Defense Strategy, and you absolutely should, leaders go read, figure out what it is that we're here for, right? But at a basic level, treating other people the way you want to be treated, treating people with dignity and respect, holding them to a high standard, understanding what comes first and what our main thing is. So understanding that we are all airmen first, in our case, in the United States Air Force, that we are in this profession of arms, that we are warriors, that we're here to be lethal and ready so that our nation, when they need to use our instrument of power, it's ready and capable. You can't build that operational competence when the crisis happens. You will achieve mission outcomes. We heard earlier today, CZ was here, our former SEAC. He was speaking about an opportunity, a short notice tasking that came up that within 24 hours, we're able to employ forces. We do that all the time in our service. We can be sitting here today, and we have been, and in recent history, our airmen have been executing a mission in their home station environment, and they get a phone call. And within 72 hours, we might be receiving in refugees from a country in crisis. And we have asked those airmen to pick up what they were doing and go do something completely maybe not completely aligned with what they do day to day, but it is inside the scope of what it means to be an airman in the profession of arms. And we have to hold that line. We have to maintain our standards every single day. That's why standards matter. That's why discipline matters, because we have taken an oath and we are serving a calling that's bigger than ourselves. Our nation relies on us in moments of crisis to go execute and do dangerous things, to go kill people and blow shit up. That's what we do. We can't do that if we situationally employ our culture and our standards. You've got to do that every single day. So you wake up every day, you believe in the profession of arms, you don the cloth of your nation, you go execute what you've been asked to do to the best of your ability, the rest of it's going to take care of itself.
Thank you, sir.
You bet.
All right, we only have a couple minutes left, but I'd like to end with General Alvin. Sir, what lessons do you think that we can learn from our current adversaries that would contribute to the operations and strategies that we will utilize currently?
So this is along the lines of sort of the conflicts that are going on, Ukraine, Middle East, Gaza, those sort of things.
Yes, sir.
I would, before I say anything, I would say we always need to be a little bit humble about lessons that we think we've learned, because those continue to unravel and unwind. And so I'd say this with that huge caveat. As an airman, you wouldn't expect me to say anything different, but this is something, if you want to hook up a polygraph to me, you'd know that I'm not just saying because I believe this. My number one lesson out of the conflict that's going on in Ukraine is not that, hey, we need to get used to fighting without air superiority. It's the terrible outcome if you don't have air superiority. Air superiority is not less valuable, it is more valuable than ever, so you don't get into a trench warfare with drones. That is one thing I've yet to see evidence that would disprove that or make me come off of that belief. The other one that I feel fairly confident about is we should be learning from this not only the value but the imperative of rapid innovation in combat. So, you know, we saw drones get introduced into the Ukrainian conflict. So, drones, that's the answer. That's going to change everything. And then there was the counter to that. And we rediscovered the electromagnetic spectrum is pretty important because electronic warfare is pretty important. And we do this, and then we should be stepping back and saying, it's the move, counter move, not the individual capability that we're using, but it's the ability to rapidly look forward and move after next and understand where the arc of the technology is going, because you can't apply something that is really a tactical and operational like the large numbers of very low cost drones and UAVs that are going around the central plains of Europe right now, that is going to obtain in the same way in a theater that has the tyranny of distance like the Indo-Pacific theater. So you're trying to draw out which of those things exactly will apply to a theater, I think is fraught with peril. But I think in general, I take away air superiority has never been more important. And even though it may not be the way that we used to wistfully think about it, where we could own the skies for days and weeks and months, we need to come to a reality that we still need to own the skies. But it's important that even if it's temporal and regional and local, it has to be synchronized, because we don't gain air superiority just because it's cool. We gain and maintain air superiority in order for the rest of the force to achieve the objectives that the nation needs. And so whether it's shorter or more local or how that comes about, it is still required. It just is now, needs to be reimagined in a way that is consistent with to what Simsaf said, what the outcomes are, what is that. So I think those two things strike me as the two that I will carry forward. There's probably more to be learned that are still unfolding though.
Thank you, sir.
Senior leaders and Cadet Strang, thank you for your candid discussion. At this time, I would like to open the floor for any questions. Attendees can ask questions at the microphones positioned in the audience.
See, this is crazy, by the way. So Chief Flossie and I, we go around to all calls, and you have to almost coax people to get up to the microphones. People are knocking each other over to get to the microphones. This is great.
That's right. It's because General Whiting's here.
Sir, Cadet Candidate Guevara, Bravo Squadron from the prep school. This is a question for Chief Flossie. Sir, you've served a career with a focus on nuclear deterrence. Myself, being a 2W2 serving in Minot, I got the opportunity to see some of that deterrence. How do you feel that your background in establishing deterrence will play a key role in a future conflict with China?
Now, thanks for the question. I think one of the main reasons China, the PRC in particular, wakes up on any given day and says, not today, is because we have a credible strategic nuclear deterrence, backstopped by 2/3 of the nuclear triad in the United States Air Force. We have the flexible and we have the rapid response capability. We just demonstrated it again today. We do it all the time in a very public way, right? Minuteman III launches out of Vandenberg. Some short period of time later, things come down in the Kwajalein Atoll, exactly where we pointed them with the effect that we want. And each one of those multiply independent targeted reentry vehicles that have 10, 20 times or more the destructive capability of Hiroshima or Nagasaki sends a powerful deterrence message. So understanding the strategic environment is really important. On a daily basis, executing the missions that we execute, we do things, and you will be asked to do things at a tactical level, right? Tactical and operational level, but they have an implication in a complex global strategic environment that we live in today. We're in this infinite game. We're vying for favor on the global stage. So the capabilities that we bring to bear across the spectrum of the Department of the Air Force, we have capabilities and abilities that we bring to bear that no other service and no other nation can provide. And so we must be really, really good at it. So how has that perspective helped me? I think understanding that environment informs our ability to give advice to the department's leadership. It helps when, part of our job, by the way, not the fun part of the job, this is a fun part of the job, right, amongst our family here. But we also have a responsibility to go articulate what our nation is demanding of us and what we're getting from Congress. So we go across the hill and we talk to congressional members regularly. And being able to articulate from a position of authority and experience has helped me a lot. Articulate, you know, the global requirements of combatant commanders exceeds the resources that we have in the United States Air Force today to go execute them on our nation's behalf. So, you know, General Alvin recently released, it was an op-ed, sir, talking about the need for more Air Force. It's not because we're parochial. It's because no other service can establish and provide the necessary conditions we need to fight and win in certain theaters around the world. We must go do those things. And at the same time, we can never lose focus on our number one priority, which is to defend the homeland. That's a sacred commitment that we have to this nation. So we're not going to compromise there. But so having that background has allowed me to articulate that in a way that resonates in a politically agnostic way. Those are things our nation needs in order to go continue to live the lifestyle that we believe in, a free and open lifestyle that with principles like liberty and freedom are protected.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thanks for your 2W2 service. Appreciate it. There's like 2 of us here.
Good morning, gentlemen. My name is Cadet George Blue, Detachment 860, Utah State University. General Alvin, I'd just like to, first of all, thank you for the video you made on the duty patches. I think it meant a lot for you to say the why to us, and I really appreciate that. And you talked a lot about creating buy-in and creating a team. And so I just was wondering, and it's open to anyone, what kind of things can we do as second lieutenants to help build a team early on and create that buy-in for our squadron or our flight?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for the feedback. It's, you know, sometimes you get all sorts of interesting feedback on social media. But I do appreciate that the reason why you said it was a good thing is I did explain the why, and that's important. If we leave that space open when we're making change, and I think B9 was talking about change is happening all the time now, it is important because you deserve that. Once you know the why, then we expect you to say, I got it, and move on and move out with it. But I think that idea, and I talked about it with warrior ethos as well, is that you get so much more out of intrinsically understanding the value rather than having a transactional Air Force. If you have a transactional Air Force, please stay and I'll give you this. Well, what have you given me then? And maybe I'll stay a little longer. Now, some of those things, there's very complex decisions that we have to make, but we want to amplify the intrinsic value of our Air Force. And it really is about that warrior ethos and building a team that outstrips the needs of the individual. I would say as a young lieutenant moving into that, try and live that. I would show my leadership, so let's talk up first. I would show my leadership that I am committed to the mission and that I am willing to take measured risk on your behalf with your, with your authority to allow me to do that, empower me to do that. And then that helps the leaders understand if I empower that young lieutenant to do that and help them fail forward and stay within the lines but take smart risk, I know I can count on that lieutenant to build that team. And when they're out on Tinian Island or somewhere in the second island chain where they're disconnected and I need them to do a mission, but I can't tell them exactly how right now. That's leading up. For everyone on your team, the cliches are cliches for a reason because sometimes they're often right and they're just often repeated. Lead by example. Do that very thing and show to your team that you hold the value of the team over whatever you might accomplish for your own personal gain or recognition or whatever. Just that lead by example. And because there's a lot more people looking at you as a lieutenant than you think. When we came in the 80s, they were like, well, lieutenant, you can get away with anything until you're probably a captain or major. No. No, no. We are relying on our leadership that is coming right into our force, our officer leadership, and even our young airmen coming in to be able to go and execute on day one. We need to have a sense of urgency without a sense of panic, which means you got to build that team fast. So build trust in your leadership, that you're someone responsible that they can empower, and build trust in the team around you that you're looking out for them more than you. Lead by example. Thank you for the question.
Thanks, sir.
Good morning, gentlemen. Cadet Holder from Valdosta State University. So I wanted to ask all of y'all, with recent things like the Air Force trying to posture in the Indo-Pacific to push back against China, moving their influence past the second island chain, with things like the Air Force rebuilding Tinian Island, what challenges do you see as us in this room, the future of the Air Force, seeing as leaders with that influence that China has past that second island chain?
I don't want to dominate, but I'll go again.
That's an exciting question.
Yeah,
I'll tee you up. How about that?
Tee me up.
All right. So, so you said what challenges? I would just restate it because I'm an optimist. What opportunities are out there? What do we have to work through? So the construct of the Air Force that we grew up in is not optimized for the environment we're asking you to operate in now. So we owe you that. We are working really hard on that. We need your support and buy-in on that, and great ideas. I think you've heard all of that earlier today. The opportunities are out there is that we are no longer going to ask you to just be really, really good at one little thing. We need you to be a warrior that understands the art of air power, and that better understands at a comprehension level what the commander's intent is. We're expecting you now to go out into those places that have limited resources, and you'll have limited communications, and the supply chains are, until you've gone to Tinian, I don't think I can articulate in a sufficient way how remote and isolated the Indo-Pacific theater is. You've got to go experience it. So we're working on opportunities for you to get that experience now, so the first time you experience it isn't when you need to go do it. But in those environments, and then across the spectrum of conflict, all of those domains are contested. You know, I mentioned supply chains. The information environment is incredibly contested. That we talked about how fast our adversaries moving in space. We know how fast they're moving in the air, on the ground, in and on the water. So you're going to have to operate potentially with limited communications in incredibly challenging and austere locations to execute inside the WES, inside a dangerous area, and you're going to have to be ready to move. So we're building those conditions for you to be able to go do that. But the opportunities that exist is, if you put that mission-ready mindset on, like, how do I go do that? What do I need to go do that? And you start thinking about whether it's life support areas and establishing a safe operating location for your service members. That's not put at risk within 60 minutes because you didn't think about the threat from the air or from space. You will then be able to train and qualify and make sure you build small, highly capable teams that can accomplish all of those tasks and very, very proficiently before you get into that environment. So that's kind of the opportunity that's there, and I'll hand it over to the chief.
I don't want to monopolize, but here's the exciting part. We're all learning this together, relearning it together. So what we're trying to do, what we are doing with the development of the new wing structure where we can train as units for that environment is ensure that your unit is trained together, because there are large swaths of our force in the way that we deploy into the Middle East right now where we don't deploy as units. We deploy and we crowdsource, so you don't really learn the mission ahead of time, which means as you're young lieutenants and coming in, you can't necessarily look to the captains and majors and say, you know what, we've done this. Let me take you to this environment where you may expect to be under fire and you may have to just survive, and it's your responsibility to get those aircraft airborne. I mean, almost all of our force has grown up in an environment where we've evolved from doing the mission at home in sanctuary in the continental United States, and then we'll go deploy. And I'm going to generalize, I know it doesn't apply to everything, but in general, we deploy and we do sort of the same mission as we do at home, we just do it in a different environment. But we do the same mission. That's not going to be the way it is. Our forces right now do not train to be able to survive under attack, generate under missile threat, be able to rapidly repair runways if they've been cratered, all those sort of things that we need to be better at. We can do it, but you know what? We need to be the best at it. And the only way we're the best at it is we train as units. You're going to be coming into an Air Force that doesn't have a lot of years and years of experience of doing that. So we're all learning it together, which is great. That's fantastic opportunities to do it, and you can help lead up. That's why I think it's exciting, because we're all jumping into this new environment together. Sense of urgency without a sense of panic. A little bit excited about this.
Awesome. Thank you, gentlemen.
Good morning, gentlemen. C4C Robert Rasmussen from Cadet Squadron 32. I'd like to thank you all once again for coming out and being with us today. And so recently, Secretary Hegseth talked about the renewal, or the need to renew an increased focus on China. And he also talking about cuts in the defense budget, which could also mean pulling some forces from Europe and the Middle East. And my question to all of you is, how are we going to keep keep supporting our allies, both Europe, the Middle East, and around the globe, with an increased focus on China, especially when China's #1 focus is Taiwan, and we can see that with their live fire exercises, especially the one conducted last October?
I would give that to him. Ruthless prioritization and risk mitigation. Over to you.
Yeah. But, you know, I think Secretary Hegseth has clarified that the 8% that he's talking about is about taking dollars within the budget and now reprioritizing them on the president's and his priorities. So, you know, the president has clearly said he expects our allies to carry their weight in their defense, and he expects them to increase their ability to do that. You know, they should be carrying the majority of the burden for their defense. And so I think you're going to see smart decisions made that will make sure that our forces are aligned where they need to be to do one of the Secretary's priorities, which is to reestablish deterrence. And we'll have the forces where we need to do that. I can certainly say from a space perspective, China is the pacing threat. You know, China is the one moving breathtakingly fast. They have an aspiration to be the world's greatest space power in the years ahead. They're not there today. We are the world's greatest space power, and it's our job to make sure that we remain that.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Morning, gentlemen. I'm CC Hudson from Alpha Squadron at the Prep School. My question is a bit of a lengthy one, so I apologize in advance for that. During my time at the Prep, I've gotten to see how different organizations indirectly support each other. For example, in Alpha Squadron, our morale team isn't solely responsible for morale. I've seen that our standards and evaluation team kind of do their own room inspections, and that in turn keeps the AMTs off our back. So that in turn affects morale, squadron morale. And my question for you, gentlemen, is during your careers in the operational air and space forces, how have seemingly unrelated career fields and departments come together to complement each other in a way one might not see on the surface?
I couldn't understand what he was saying.
We're all old, and we've gone partially deaf in service to this great nation. So, can you restate that with a lot less words?
Yes.
Please.
During your careers, have you noticed different departments coming together to complement each other in a way that you may not think of at first?
Okay, so different departments. I thought you had said like underappreciated some things, but.
Sorry about that, sir.
Okay.
Different departments like in services?
Yes, different departments, different career fields, anything.
If I could maybe start by answering this, and certainly they'll give better ideas. You know, I have a joint staff, and so that means my force is made up of airmen, guardians, soldiers, sailors, Marines. And one of the things you learn when you start to work with all the other services is, first of all, they are great Americans, just like the Americans that you serve with in your service. Yep, they might have a different passion. Maybe they were called to, you know, to be on the ocean, and they joined the Navy because they love sailing and those kind of things. But they're great. But as the CSAF talked about, there are these different cultures, and those cultures sometimes result in institutional strengths. So I have a saying at U.S. Space Command, and it's built on stereotypes, so they break down, and they apply to others. But I say, I want us to plan like a soldier. I want us to be strategic like a sailor. I want us to fight like a Marine. I want us to debrief like an airman, and I want us to punch above our weight like a guardian. And those are institutional strengths that I see in each of the services, and they bring something to our organization. I think it's one of the reasons the U.S. is the world's greatest military is we do have a tradition of joint warfighting that leverages these strengths from all across our services, all the specialties, all the AFSCs, MOSs, whatever you have. China and Russia do not have that. And they don't have a tradition of joint warfighting. They try to stand up organizations because they look at us and then they stand them down because it doesn't work. That's a strength we got to continue to foster as we go forward.
I think I would say stay tuned, because what's happening right now, I think, is offering. Again, I do not shrink from change. I love change. I am about it. And what we're seeing right now, when we're talking about these drastic, molar sucking 8%, that is, quite frankly, that's actually more than you think, because when you think of the discretionary versus the non-discretionary, that's a lot. But it's one of those, the mother of invention is necessity. When we are faced with the types of decisions that we're looking at, it's shaking us collectively, each of our services, out of our, we're going to continue to try and still do things the way we were before. I just need a little bit more money here and a little bit. When we have to make these sorts of cuts, I anticipate it will offer the opportunity for lots of new dialogue about coming together and doing things across services that we wouldn't have thought of before, and maybe have the culture take a background to this necessity of what Simsas said, the outcome, the mission outcome. So stay tuned. I'm hopeful that this is something that hopefully we'll see more and more unfold in the coming months and years.
Yeah, if I could just add on that real quick. Now, not necessarily two departments, but two services, right? The Air Force and the Space Force. You go to a Space Force base, chances are you may see more airmen than you do Guardians on an installation, right? We're a primarily employed in place force. That's how we present to General Whiting for the most part, right? But those power projection platforms, those installations are executed by airmen. Right? Now, we may be under one department, but we are two separate services. And that relationship, that synergy between the Air Force and the Space Force is getting stuff done. Right? Two different cultures, but coming together for a common purpose is a beautiful thing to see. When I drive on to Peterson or Schriever or Vandenberg, I see defenders at the gate. I see dirt boys making sure the roads are taken care of. Right? I see CE making sure that they have power and HVAC for operation centers. That's a common purpose, two different uniforms, two different cultures, getting the work done. And I appreciate that teamwork, because that's what we should be doing.
Yeah, 100%. We kind of grew up in an environment where at least operating, if not assigned to a joint organization, it was sort of a circumstance presented itself based off of coincidence, that we're like, oh, you've got this complementary capability. So meaning we would deploy with what we thought were all the capabilities to go execute a specific type of mission in the CENTCOM AOR. But then we would be geographically co-located, like with a Marine unit that's also doing a similar mission. And we would find, as we struggled with whether it was supporting the ATO and getting a sortie up in the air, or providing some capability to the joint force, and we were struggling with it, right? So then you go into a planning meeting and you've got a Marine sitting there. It's like, oh, I've got a guy for that. It was a coincidence, and it was great. And we obviously, then we learned from each other and we got better. We can't afford to do that in Indo-PACOM. So those examples that we have seen, we're now deliberately setting them up. I was just out at an exercise Nexus Forge, which was our Air Force Reserve Command, doing a 400 level certification event. So they certified their lead wing to go deploy here in a few months. And they are now training and exercising with the entire joint force. So we had a Marine unit out there loading some really cool, actually, ground-to-air air defense systems onto our C-17s for the first time. So we did some fit checks. We're learning it now in the training and exercise environment, so that what the chief said, stay tuned. We know that we have to be very complementary in the way that we employ ourselves. We can't all show up and then find out we all deployed 30 people that do the same thing. We don't have the supply chains to do it. It's too risky of an environment. We can't afford it. So we've got to learn that now. We're doing those exercises now so that we can be very, very small, very agile when we go into that operating environment.
We have time for one more question.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Good morning, gentlemen. CC Rice, Prep School Charlie Squadron. I just wanted to know, given current events and you guys' position in the Air Force, how do you guys make difficult decisions and handle difficult decisions that are placed on you?
I say two words: first principles. I always try and find, when everything's complex and there's emotion and you need context, understand what is about this, this environment that makes this decision so tough, and it's easy to sort of get off on emotion and you bring a team in. What really helps me focus, or what are the first principles? So I'll go back to the standards things. What were the first principles behind why we knew that we had to change something about the way that we had sort of proliferated things and made them maybe much more difficult to enforce, and the outcomes were that people were deciding whether or not they wanted to comply or not. And so what were the first principles that we wanted? That's we sort of disciplined ourselves to say, well, it needs to be easy to understand and easy to comply with and easy to enforce. And so once you break it down to, here's the decision that's in front of me, what is, to Simsat's point, what is the outcome that we want? And then what are the first principles? And that really takes you, it sort of draws in the complexity of it, and it lets you have a North Star so you don't drift. And when you come up with these really complex things that come out of blue, which these tough decisions often do, I didn't know you're thinking about that when you asked the question, but at least you have your first principles that say, this are the assumptions, and this is sort of the rationale by which I judged different outcomes or different courses of action and led me to that decision. Simplifying complex things requires, I think, first principles and sort of a guiding light. And I think with that, it helps you stay on path. You'll adjust here and there, but I think it helps you stay on path. That's just my own personal experience.
It's a great answer. The only thing I'll build on that is when you are out in the force leading, whether it's a crew, an office, a flight, whatever that level is, define what your mission is, what your vision is, and what your priorities are. Those will help keep you focused on those first principles. Communicate that with your team. In fact, get their collaboration. Make sure you all understand that. And then you've got those guardrails, and people can go execute via mission command, and tough decisions will come up, and people are all kind of making decisions. Again, being a mission-focused organization, values-laden, purpose-driven, all heading in that same direction.
Yeah, I mean, and I think CZ talked about it before, right? Your oath of office and oath of enlistment has not changed. The core values, whether the values of the Air Force, values of the Space Force, values of the Navy, are enduring. They have not changed. They are the Polaris. They are the guiding light. They're the touchstone. As military professionals, as a professional organization that we stick to. And if we focus on the mission, stay true to our values, remember what our oaths are, we will prevail and work through all of these difficult decisions and challenges and things that we go through.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Senior leaders, we appreciate you taking the time to share your seasoned warfighter perspectives with us at NCLS. Audience, please stand for the departure of the official party.
Thanks, team.
This concludes the Enix Heritage Keynote Lecture.